Switzerland. Officially, the Swiss Confederation is a landlocked country located in west-central Europe. It is bordered by Italy to the south, France to the west, Germany to the north, and Austria and Liechtenstein to the east. Switzerland is geographically divided among the Swiss Plateau, the Alps, and the Jura. The Alps occupy the greater part of the territory, whereas most of the country's population of 9 million are concentrated on the plateau, which hosts its largest cities and economic centers, including Zurich, Geneva, and Basel. Switzerland originates from the old Swiss Confederacy established in the late Middle Ages, following a series of military successes against Austria and Burgundy. The Federal Charter of 1291 is considered the country's founding document. Swiss independence from the Holy Roman Empire was formally recognized in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. Switzerland has maintained a policy of armed neutrality since the 16th century and has not fought an international war since 1815. It joined the United Nations only in 2002 but pursues an active foreign policy that includes frequent involvement in peace building. Switzerland is the birthplace of the Red Cross and hosts the headquarters or offices of most major international institutions, including the WTO, the WHO, the ILO, FIFA, and the UN. It is a founding member of the European Free Trade Association, but not part of the European Union, the European Economic Area, or the Eurozone. However, it participates in the European Single Market and the Schengen area. Switzerland is a federal republic composed of 26 cantons, with federal authorities based in Bern. Switzerland is one of the world's most developed countries, with the highest nominal wealth per adult and the 8th highest gross domestic product per capita. Switzerland ranks first in the Human Development Index since 2021 and performs highly also on several international metrics, including economic competitiveness and democratic governance. Cities such as Zurich, Geneva, and Basel rank among the highest in terms of quality of life, albeit with some of the highest costs of living. It has 4 main linguistic and cultural regions: German, French, Italian and Romansh. Although most Swiss are German-speaking, national identity is fairly cohesive, being rooted in a common historical background, shared values such as federalism and direct democracy, and Alpine symbolism. Swiss identity transcends language, ethnicity, and religion, leading to Switzerland being described as a Willens nation rather than a nation-state. History. The state of Switzerland took its present form with the adoption of the Swiss Federal Constitution in 1848. Switzerland's precursors established a defensive alliance in 1291, forming a loose confederation that persisted for centuries. The oldest traces of hominid existence in Switzerland date to about 150,000 years ago. The oldest known farming settlements in Switzerland, which were found at Göcklingen, date to around 5300 BC. The earliest known tribes formed the Hallstatt and Latine cultures, named after the archaeological site of Latine on the north side of Lake Neuchâtel. Latine culture developed and flourished during the Late Iron Age from around 450 BC, possibly influenced by Greek and Etruscan civilizations. One of the most important tribal groups was the Helvetii. Steadily harassed by Germanic tribes, in 58 BC, the Helvetii decided to abandon the Swiss plateau and migrate to western Gallia. Julius Caesar's armies pursued and defeated them at the Battle of Bibracte, in today's eastern France, forcing the tribe to move back to its homeland. In 15 BC, Tiberius and his brother Drusus conquered the Alps, integrating them into the Roman Empire. The area occupied by the Helvetii first became part of Rome's Gallia Belgica province and then of its Germania Superior province. The eastern portion of modern Switzerland was integrated into the Roman province of Rhaetia. Sometime around the start of the Common Era, the Romans maintained a large camp called Vindonissa, now a ruin at the confluence of the Ara and Reuss rivers, near the town of Windisch. The 1st and 2nd century AD was an age of prosperity on the Swiss plateau. Towns such as Aventicum, Iulia Equestris, and Augusta Raurica reached a remarkable size, while hundreds of agricultural estates were established in the countryside. Around 260 AD, the fall of the Agridocumates territory north of the Rhine transformed today's Switzerland into a frontier land of the empire. Repeated raids by the Alemanni tribes provoked the ruin of the Roman towns and economy, forcing the population to shelter near Roman fortresses, like the Castrum Roricense near Augusta Raurica. The empire built another line of defense at the north border. At the end of the 4th century, the increased Germanic pressure forced the Romans to abandon the linear defense concept. The Swiss plateau was finally open to Germanic tribes. In the early Middle Ages, from the end of the 4th century, the western extent of modern-day Switzerland was part of the territory of the kings of the Burgundians. The Alemanni settled the Swiss plateau in the 5th century and the valleys of the Alps in the 8th century, forming Alemannia. Modern-day Switzerland was then divided between the kingdoms of Alemannia and Burgundy. The entire region became part of the expanding Frankish Empire in the 6th century, following Clovis I's victory over the Alemanni at Tolbiac in 504 AD, and later Frankish domination of the Burgundians. Throughout the rest of the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries, Swiss regions continued under Frankish hegemony, but after its extension under Charlemagne, the Frankish Empire was divided by the Treaty of Verdun in 843. The territories of present-day Switzerland became divided into Middle Francia and East Francia until they were reunified under the Holy Roman Empire around 1000 AD. By 1200, the Swiss plateau comprised the dominions of the houses of Savoy, Zuringer, Habsburg, and Kyburg. Some regions were accorded the imperial immediacy to grant the empire direct control over the mountain passes. With the extinction of its male line in 1263, the Kyburg dynasty fell in AD 1264. The Habsburgs under King Rudolf I laid claim to the Kyburg lands and annexed them, extending their territory to the eastern Swiss plateau. Old Swiss Confederacy. The Old Swiss Confederacy was an alliance among the valley communities of the Central Alps. The confederacy was governed by nobles and patricians of various cantons who facilitated management of common interests and ensured peace on mountain trade routes. The Federal Charter of 1291 is considered the Confederacy's founding document, even though similar alliances likely existed decades earlier. The document was agreed among the rural communes of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden. By 1353, the three original cantons had joined with the cantons of Glarus and Zug and the Lucerne, Zurich, and Bern city-states to form the Old Confederacy of 8 states that obtained through the end of the 15th century. The expansion led to increased power and wealth for the Confederation. By 1460, the Confederates controlled most of the territory south and west of the Rhine to the Alps and the Jura Mountains, and the University of Basel was founded, establishing a tradition of chemical and medical research. This increased after victories against the Habsburgs, over Charles the Bold of Burgundy during the 1470s, and the success of the Swiss mercenaries. The Swiss victory in the Swabian War against the Swabian League of Emperor Maximilian I in 1499 amounted to de facto independence within the Holy Roman Empire. In 1501, Basel and Schaffhausen joined the Old Swiss Confederacy. The Confederacy acquired a reputation of invincibility during these earlier wars, but expansion of the Confederation suffered a setback in 1515 with the Swiss defeat in the Battle of Marignano. This ended the so-called heroic epoch of Swiss history. The success of Zwingli's Reformation in some cantons led to intercantonal religious conflicts in 1529 and 1531. It was not until more than 100 years after these internal wars that, in 1648, under the Peace of Westphalia, European countries recognized Switzerland's independence from the Holy Roman Empire and its neutrality. During the early modern period of Swiss history, the growing authoritarianism of the patriciate families combined with a financial crisis in the wake of the 30 Years' War led to the Swiss Peasant War of 1653. In the background to this struggle, the conflict between Catholic and Protestant cantons persisted, erupting in further violence at the First War of Villmergen, in 1656, and the Toggenburg War, in 1712. In 1798, the revolutionary French government invaded Switzerland and imposed a new unified constitution. This centralized the government of the country, effectively abolishing the cantons. Moreover, Mulhausen left Switzerland and the Valtellina Valley became part of the Cisalpine Republic. The new regime, known as the Helvetic Republic, was highly unpopular. An invading foreign army had imposed and destroyed centuries of tradition, making Switzerland nothing more than a French satellite state. The fierce French suppression of the Nidwalden Revolt in September 1798 was an example of the oppressive presence of the French army and the local population's resistance to the occupation. When war broke out between France and its rivals, Russian and Austrian forces invaded Switzerland. The Swiss refused to fight alongside the French in the name of the Helvetic Republic. In 1803 Napoleon organized a meeting of the leading Swiss politicians from both sides in Paris. The Act of Mediation was the result, which largely restored Swiss autonomy and introduced a confederation of 19 cantons. Henceforth, much of Swiss politics would concern balancing the cantons' tradition of self-rule with the need for a central government. In 1815 the Congress of Vienna fully re-established Swiss independence, and the European powers recognized permanent Swiss neutrality. Swiss troops served foreign governments until 1860 when they fought in the Siege of Gaeta. The treaty allowed Switzerland to increase its territory, with the admission of the cantons of Valais, Neuchâtel, and Geneva. Switzerland's borders saw only minor adjustments thereafter. The restoration of power to the patriciate was only temporary. After a period of unrest with repeated violent clashes, such as the Zerapus of 1839, civil war broke out in 1847 when some Catholic cantons tried to set up a separate alliance. The war lasted less than a month, causing fewer than 100 casualties, most of which were through friendly fire. The Sonderbundskrieg had a significant impact on the psychology and society of Switzerland. The war convinced most Swiss of the need for unity and strength. Swiss from all strata of society, whether Catholic or Protestant, from the liberal or conservative current, realized that the cantons would profit more from merging their economic and religious interests. Thus, while the rest of Europe saw revolutionary uprisings, the Swiss drew up a constitution that provided for a federal layout, much of it inspired by the American example. This constitution provided central authority while leaving the cantons the right to self-government on local issues. Giving credit to those who favored the power of the cantons, the National Assembly was divided between an upper house and a lower house. Referendums were made mandatory for any amendments. This new constitution ended the legal power of nobility in Switzerland. A single system of weights and measures was introduced, and in 1850 the Swiss franc became the Swiss single currency, complemented by the WIR franc in 1934. Article 11 of the Constitution forbade sending troops to serve abroad, marking the end of foreign service. It came with the expectation of serving the Holy See, and the Swiss were still obliged to serve Francis II of the Two Sicilies with Swiss guards present at the Siege of Gaeta in 1860. An important clause of the Constitution was that it could be entirely rewritten, if necessary, thus enabling it to evolve as a whole rather than being modified one amendment at a time. This need soon proved itself when the rise in population and the Industrial Revolution that followed led to calls to modify the constitution accordingly. The population rejected an early draft in 1872, but modifications led to its acceptance in 1874. It introduced the facultative referendum for laws at the federal level. It also established federal responsibility for defense, trade, and legal matters. In 1891, the Constitution was revised with uncommonly strong elements of direct democracy, which remain unique today. Modern history. Switzerland was not invaded during either of the World Wars. During World War I, Switzerland was home to the revolutionary and founder of the Soviet Union Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, who remained there until 1917. Swiss neutrality was seriously questioned by the short-lived Grimm-Hoffmann affair in 1917. In 1920, Switzerland joined the League of Nations, which was based in Geneva, after it was exempted from military requirements. During World War II, detailed invasion plans were drawn up by the Germans, but Switzerland was never attacked. Switzerland was able to remain independent through a combination of military deterrence, concessions to Germany, and good fortune, as larger events during the war intervened. General Henry Gysin, appointed the commander-in-chief for the duration of the war, ordered a general mobilization of the armed forces. The Swiss military strategy changed from static defense at the borders to organized long-term attrition and withdrawal to strong, well-stockpiled positions high in the Alps, known as the Redoubt. Switzerland was an important base for espionage by both sides and often mediated communications between the Axis and Allied powers. Switzerland's trade was blockaded by both the Allies and the Axis. Economic cooperation and extension of credit to Nazi Germany varied according to the perceived likelihood of invasion and the availability of other trading partners. Concessions reached a peak after a crucial rail link through Vichy France was severed in 1942, leaving Switzerland together with Liechtenstein entirely isolated from the wider world by Axis-controlled territory. Over the course of the war, Switzerland interned over 300,000 refugees aided by the International Red Cross, based in Geneva. Strict immigration and asylum policies and the financial relationships with Nazi Germany raised controversy, only at the end of the 20th century. During the war, the Swiss Air Force engaged aircraft of both sides, shooting down 11 intruding Luftwaffe planes in May and June 1940, then forcing down other intruders after a change of policy following threats from Germany. Over 100 Allied bombers and their crews were interned. Between 1940 and 1945, Switzerland was bombed by the Allies, causing fatalities and property damage. Among the cities and towns bombed were Basel, Bruzio, Chiasso, Cornwall, Geneva, Koblenz, Niederweningen, Raffs, Renens, Samedan, Schaffhausen, Stein am Rhein, Tagerweilen, Vaingen, Vals, and Zurich. Allied forces maintained that the bombings, which violated the 96th Article of War, resulted from navigation errors, equipment failure, weather conditions, and pilot errors. The Swiss expressed fear and concern that the bombings were intended to put pressure on Switzerland to end economic cooperation and neutrality with Nazi Germany. Court-martial proceedings took place in England. The US paid SFR 62M for reparations. Switzerland's attitude towards refugees was complicated and controversial. Over the course of the war, it admitted as many as 300,000 refugees while refusing tens of thousands more, including Jews persecuted by the Nazis. After the war, the Swiss government exported credits through the charitable fund known as the Schweizer and donated to the Marshall Plan to help Europe's recovery, efforts that ultimately benefited the Swiss economy. During the Cold War, Swiss authorities considered the construction of a Swiss nuclear bomb. Leading nuclear physicists at the Federal Institute of Technology Zurich such as Paul Scherrer made this a realistic possibility. In 1988, the Paul Scherrer Institute was founded in his name to explore the therapeutic uses of neutron scattering technologies. Financial problems with the defense budget and ethical considerations prevented the substantial funds from being allocated, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 was seen as a valid alternative. Plans for building nuclear weapons were dropped by 1988. Switzerland joined the Council of Europe in 1963. Switzerland was the last Western republic to grant women the right to vote. Some Swiss cantons approved this in 1959, while at the federal level, it was achieved in 1971 and, after resistance, in the last canton Appenzell-Innerrhoden in 1990. After obtaining suffrage at the federal level, women quickly rose in political significance. The first woman on the 7-member Federal Council executive was Elisabeth Kopp, who served from 1984 to 1989, and the first female president was Ruth Dreyfus in 1999. In 1979 areas from the canton of Bern attained independence from the Bernese, forming the new canton of Jura. On April 18, 1999, the Swiss population and the cantons voted in favor of a completely revised federal constitution. In 2002 Switzerland became a full member of the United Nations, leaving Vatican City as the last widely recognized state without full UN membership. Switzerland is a founding member of the EFTA but not the European Economic Area. An application for membership in the European Union was sent in May 1992, but did not advance since rejecting the EEA in December 1992 when Switzerland conducted a referendum on the EEA. Several referendums on the EU issue ensued. Due to opposition from the citizens, the membership application was withdrawn. Nonetheless, Swiss law is gradually changing to conform with that of the EU, and the government signed bilateral agreements with the European Union. Switzerland, together with Liechtenstein, has been surrounded by the EU since Austria's entry in 1995. On June 5, 2005, Swiss voters agreed by a 55% majority to join the Schengen Treaty, a result that EU commentators regarded as a sign of support. In September 2020, a referendum calling for a vote to end the pact that allowed a free movement of people from the European Union was introduced by the Swiss People's Party. However, voters rejected the attempt to retake control of immigration, defeating the motion by roughly 63%. On February 9, 2014, 50% of Swiss voters approved a ballot initiative launched by the Swiss People's Party to restrict immigration. This initiative was mostly backed by rural and suburban groups, and isolated towns as well as by a strong majority in Ticino, while metropolitan centers and the French-speaking part rejected it. In December 2016, a political compromise with the EU was attained that eliminated quotas on EU citizens, but still allowed favorable treatment of Swiss-based job applicants. On September 27, 2020, 62% of Swiss voters rejected the anti-free movement referendum by SVP. Government and politics. The federal constitution adopted in 1848 is the legal foundation of Switzerland's federal state. A new Swiss constitution was adopted in 1999 that did not introduce notable changes to the federal structure. It outlines rights of individuals and citizen participation in public affairs, divides the powers between the Confederation and the cantons and defines federal jurisdiction and authority. Three main bodies govern on the federal level: the bicameral parliament, the Federal Council and the Federal Court. The Swiss parliament consists of two houses, the Council of States, which has 46 representatives who are elected under a system determined by each canton, and the National Council, which consists of 200 members who are elected under a system of proportional representation, reflecting each canton's population. Members serve part-time for 4 years. When both houses are in joint session, they are known collectively as the Federal Assembly. Through referendums, citizens may challenge any law passed by Parliament and, through initiatives, introduce amendments to the federal constitution, thus making Switzerland a direct democracy. The Federal Council directs the federal government, the federal administration, and serves as a collective head of state. It is a collegial body of 7 members, elected for a 4-year term by the Federal Assembly, which also oversees the Council. The President of the Confederation is elected by the Assembly from among the 7 members, traditionally in rotation and for a 1-year term. The President chairs the government and executes representative functions. The President is a primus inter pares with no additional powers and remains the head of a department within the administration. The government has been a coalition of the 4 major political parties since 1959, each party having a number of seats that roughly reflects its share of the electorate and representation in the federal parliament. The function of the Federal Supreme Court is to hear appeals against rulings of cantonal or federal courts. The judges are elected by the Federal Assembly for 6-year terms. Direct democracy and federalism are hallmarks of the Swiss political system. Swiss citizens are subject to 3 legal jurisdictions: the municipality, canton, and federal levels. The 1848 and 1999 Swiss constitutions define a system of direct democracy. The instruments of this system at the federal level, known as popular rights, include the right to submit a federal initiative and a referendum, both of which may overturn parliamentary decisions. By calling a federal referendum, a group of citizens may challenge a law passed by Parliament by gathering 50,000 signatures against the law within 100 days. If so, a national vote is scheduled where voters decide by a simple majority whether to accept or reject the law. Any 8 cantons can also call a constitutional referendum on federal law. Similarly, the Federal Constitutional Initiative allows citizens to put a constitutional amendment to a national vote, if 100,000 voters sign the proposed amendment within 18 months. The Federal Council and the Federal Assembly can supplement the proposed amendment with a counter-proposal. Then, voters must indicate a preference on the ballot if both proposals are accepted. Constitutional amendments, whether introduced by initiative or in Parliament, must be accepted by a double majority of the national popular vote and the popular cantonal votes. Cantons. The cantons are federated states. They have a permanent constitutional status and, in comparison with other countries, a high degree of independence. Under the federal constitution, all 26 cantons are equal in status, except that 6 referred to often as the half cantons are represented by 1 councillor instead of 2 in the Council of States and have only half a cantonal vote with respect to the required cantonal majority in referendums on constitutional amendments. Each canton has its own constitution and its own parliament, government, police, and courts. However, considerable differences define the individual cantons, particularly in terms of population and geographical area. Until 1848, the loosely coupled confederation did not have a central political organization. Issues thought to affect the whole confederation were the subject of periodic meetings in various locations. In 1848, the federal constitution provided that details concerning federal institutions, such as their locations, should be addressed by the Federal Assembly. Thus on November 28, 1848, the Federal Assembly voted in the majority to locate the seat of government in Bern and, as a prototypical federal compromise, to assign other federal institutions, such as the Federal Polytechnical School to Zurich, and other institutions to Lucerne, such as the later Suva and the Federal Insurance Court. Other federal institutions were subsequently attributed to Lausanne, Bellinzona, 2004, and St. Gallen. The 1999 Constitution does not mention a federal city, and the Federal Council has yet to address the matter. Thus no city in Switzerland has the official status either of capital or of federal city. Nevertheless, Bern is commonly referred to as federal city. Foreign relations and international institutions. Traditionally, Switzerland avoids alliances that might entail military, political, or direct economic action, and has been neutral since the end of its expansion in 1515. Its policy of neutrality was internationally recognized at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Swiss neutrality has been questioned at times. In 2002, Switzerland became a full member of the United Nations. It was the first state to join it by referendum. Switzerland maintains diplomatic relations with almost all countries and historically has served as an intermediary between other states. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. The Swiss people have consistently rejected membership since the early 1990s. However, Switzerland does participate in the Schengen area. Many international institutions have headquarters in Switzerland, in part because of its policy of neutrality. Geneva is the birthplace of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, the Geneva Conventions, and, since 2006, hosts the United Nations Human Rights Council. Even though Switzerland is one of the most recent countries to join the United Nations, the Palace of Nations in Geneva is the second biggest center for the United Nations after the headquarters in New York. Switzerland was a founding member and hosted the League of Nations. Apart from the United Nations headquarters, the Swiss Confederation is host to many UN agencies, including the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and about 200 other international organizations, including the World Trade Organization and the World Intellectual Property Organization. The annual meetings of the World Economic Forum in Davos bring together business and political leaders from Switzerland and foreign countries to discuss important issues. The headquarters of the Bank for International Settlements moved to Basel in 1930. Many sports federations and organizations are located in the country, including the International Handball Federation in Basel, the International Basketball Federation in Geneva, the Union of European Football Associations in Nyon, the International Federation of Association Football and the International Ice Hockey Federation both in Zurich, the International Cycling Union in Aigle, and the International Olympic Committee in Lausanne. Switzerland is scheduled to become a member of the United Nations Security Council for the 2023 to 2024 period. Switzerland and the European Union. Although not a member, Switzerland maintains relationships with the EU and European countries through bilateral agreements. The Swiss have brought their economic practices largely into conformity with those of the EU, in an effort to compete internationally. EU membership faces considerable negative popular sentiment. It is opposed by the conservative SVP party, the largest party in the National Council, and not advocated by several other political parties. The membership application was formally withdrawn in 2016. The Western French-speaking areas and the urban regions of the rest of the country tend to be more pro-EU, but do not form a significant share of the population. An integration office operates under the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Economic Affairs. 7 bilateral agreements liberalized trade ties, taking effect in 2001. This first series of bilateral agreements included the free movement of persons. A second series of agreements covering 9 areas was signed in 2004, including the Schengen Treaty and the Dublin Convention. In 2006, a referendum approved 1 billion francs of supportive investment in southern and central European countries in support of positive ties to the EU as a whole. A further referendum will be needed to approve 300 million francs to support Romania and Bulgaria and their recent admission. The Swiss have faced EU and international pressure to reduce banking secrecy and raise tax rates to parity with the EU. Preparatory discussions involved 4 areas: the electricity market, participation in Project Galileo, cooperating with the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, and certificates of origin for food products. Switzerland is a member of the Schengen passport-free zone. Land border checkpoints apply onto goods movements, but not people. Economy. Switzerland has a stable, prosperous, and high-tech economy. It is the world's wealthiest country per capita in multiple rankings. The country ranks as one of the least corrupt countries in the world, while its banking sector is rated as one of the most corrupt in the world. It has the world's 20th largest economy by nominal GDP and the 38th largest by purchasing power parity. As of 2021, it is the 13th largest exporter, and the 5th largest per capita. Zurich and Geneva are regarded as global cities, ranked as alpha and beta respectively. Basel is the capital of Switzerland's pharmaceutical industry, hosting Novartis, Roche, and many other players. It is one of the world's most important centers for the life sciences industry. Switzerland had the second highest global rating in the Index of Economic Freedom 2023, while also providing significant public services. On a per capita basis, nominal GDP is higher than those of the larger Western and Central European economies and Japan, while adjusted for purchasing power, Switzerland ranked 11th in 2017, 5th in 2018 and 9th in 2020. The 2016 World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report ranks Switzerland's economy as the world's most competitive. As of 2019, it ranks 5th globally. The European Union labeled it Europe's most innovative country and the most innovative country in the Global Innovation Index in 2023, as it had done in 2022, 2021, 2020, and 2019. It ranked 20th of 189 countries in the Ease of Doing Business Index. Switzerland's slow growth in the 1990s and the early 2000s increased support for economic reforms and harmonization with the European Union. In 2020, IMD placed Switzerland first in attracting skilled workers. For much of the 20th century, Switzerland was the wealthiest country in Europe by a considerable margin. Switzerland has one of the world's largest account balances as a percentage of GDP. In 2018, the canton of Basel City had the highest GDP per capita, ahead of Zug and Geneva. According to Credit Suisse, only about 37% of residents own their own homes, one of the lowest rates of home ownership in Europe. Housing and food price levels were 171% and 145% of the EU 25 index in 2007, compared to 113% and 104% in Germany. Switzerland is home to several large multinational corporations. The largest by revenue are Glencore, Gunvor, Nestle, Mediterranean Shipping Company, Novartis, Hoffmann La Roche, ABB, Mercuria Energy Group and Adecco. Also, notable are UBS, Zurich Insurance, Richemont, Credit Suisse, Barry Callebaut, Swiss Re, Rolex, Tetra Pak, Swatch Group, and Swiss International Airlines. Switzerland's most important economic sector is manufacturing. Manufactured products include specialty chemicals, health and pharmaceutical goods, scientific and precision measuring instruments and musical instruments. The largest exported goods are chemicals, machines, electronics, and precision instruments, watches. The service sector, especially banking and insurance, commodities trading, tourism, and international organizations, is another important industry for Switzerland. Exported services amount to a third of exports. Agricultural protectionism, a rare exception to Switzerland's free trade policies, contributes to high food prices. Product market liberalization is lagging behind many EU countries according to the OECD. Apart from agriculture, economic and trade barriers between the European Union and Switzerland are minimal, and Switzerland has free trade agreements with many countries. Switzerland is a member of the European Free Trade Association. Switzerland is considered as the land of cooperatives, with the 10 largest cooperative companies accounting for more than 11% of GDP in 2018. They include Migros and Coop, the 2 largest retail companies in Switzerland. Switzerland is a tax haven. The private sector economy dominates. It features low tax rates. Tax revenue to GDP ratio is one of the smallest of developed countries. The Swiss federal budget reached 62.8 billion Swiss francs in 2010, 11% of GDP. However, canton and municipality budgets are not counted as part of the federal budget. Total government spending is closer to 33% of GDP. The main sources of income for the federal government are the value-added tax and the direct federal tax. The main areas of expenditure are in social welfare and finance taxes. The expenditures of the Swiss Confederation have been growing from 7% of GDP in 1960 to 10% in 1990 and 11% in 2010. While the social welfare and finance sectors and tax grew from 35% in 1990 to 48% in 2010, a significant reduction of expenditures has been occurring in agriculture and national defense, from 26% to 12%. Languages. Switzerland has 4 national languages, mainly German, spoken natively by 63% of the population in 2016, French spoken natively in the west, and Italian spoken natively in the south. The 4th national language, Romansh, is a Romance language spoken locally in the southeastern trilingual canton of Grisons, and is designated by Article 4 of the Federal Constitution as a national language along with German, French, and Italian. In Article 70 it is mentioned as an official language if the authorities communicate with persons who speak Romansh. However, federal laws and other official acts do not need to be decreed in Romansh. In 2016, the languages most spoken at home among permanent residents aged 15 and older were Swiss German, French, Standard German, and Italian. Other languages spoken at home included English, Portuguese, Albanian, Spanish and Serbian and Croatian. The federal government is obliged to communicate in the official languages, and in the federal parliament simultaneous translation is provided from and into German, French and Italian. Aside from the official forms of their respective languages, the 4 linguistic regions of Switzerland also have local dialectal forms. The role played by dialects in each linguistic region varies dramatically. In German-speaking regions, Swiss German dialects have become more prevalent since the second half of the 20th century, especially in the media, and are used as an everyday language for many, while the Swiss variety of Standard German is almost always used instead of dialect for written communication. Conversely, in the French-speaking regions, local Franco-Provençal dialects have almost disappeared, while in the Italian-speaking regions, the use of Lombard dialects is mostly limited to family settings and casual conversation. The principal official languages have terms not used outside of Switzerland, known as Helvetisms. German Helvetisms are, roughly speaking, a large group of words typical of Swiss Standard German that do not appear in Standard German, nor in other German dialects. These include terms from Switzerland's surrounding language cultures, from similar terms in another language. Swiss French, while generally close to the French of France, also contains some Helvetisms. The most frequent characteristics of Helvetisms are in vocabulary, phrases, and pronunciation, although certain Helvetisms denote themselves as special in syntax and orthography. Duden, the comprehensive German dictionary, contains about 3,000 Helvetisms. Current French dictionaries, such as the Petit Larousse, include several hundred Helvetisms. Notably, Swiss French uses different terms than that of France. Learning one of the other national languages is compulsory for all Swiss pupils, hence many Swiss are supposed to be at least bilingual, especially those belonging to linguistic minority groups. Because the largest part of Switzerland is German-speaking, many French, Italian, and Romansh speakers migrating to the rest of Switzerland, and the children of those non-German speaking Swiss born within the rest of Switzerland speak German. While learning one of the other national languages at school is important, most Swiss learn English to communicate with Swiss speakers of other languages, as it is perceived as a neutral means of communication. English often functions as the de facto lingua franca. Culture. Swiss culture is characterized by diversity, which is reflected in diverse traditional customs. A region may be in some ways culturally connected to the neighboring country that shares its language, all rooted in Western European culture. The linguistically isolated Romansh culture in Graubünden in eastern Switzerland constitutes an exception. It survives only in the upper valleys of the Rhine and the Inn and strives to maintain its rare linguistic tradition. Switzerland is home to notable contributors to literature, art, architecture, music, and sciences. In addition, the country attracted creatives during times of unrest or war. Some 1,000 museums are found in the country. Among the most important cultural performances held annually are the Palia Festival, Lucerne Festival, the Montreux Jazz Festival, the Locarno International Film Festival, and Art Basel. Alpine symbolism played an essential role in shaping Swiss history and the Swiss national identity. Many alpine areas and ski resorts attract visitors for winter sports as well as hiking and mountain biking in summer. The quieter seasons are spring and autumn. A traditional pastoral culture predominates in many areas, and small farms are omnipresent in rural areas. Folk art is nurtured in organizations across the country. Switzerland most directly appears in music, dance, poetry, wood carving, and embroidery. The Alphorn, a trumpet-like musical instrument made of wood, has joined yodeling and the accordion as epitomes of traditional Swiss music. Religion. Christianity is the predominant religion according to national surveys of Swiss Federal Statistical Office, divided between the Catholic Church, the Swiss Reformed Church, further Protestant churches, Eastern Orthodoxy, and other Christian denominations. Switzerland has no official state religion, though most of the cantons except Geneva and Neuchâtel recognize official churches, either the Catholic Church or the Swiss Reformed Church. These churches, and in some cantons the Old Catholic Church and Jewish congregations, are financed by official taxation of members. In 2020, the Roman Catholic Church had 3,048,475 registered and church tax-paying members, while the Swiss Reformed Church had 2,015,816 members. 26% of Swiss permanent residents are not affiliated with the religious community. As of 2020, according to a national survey conducted by the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, Christian minority communities included Neopietism, Pentecostalism, mostly incorporated in the Schweizer Pfingstmission, apostolic communities, other Protestant denominations, the Old Catholic Church, other Christian denominations. Non-Christian religions are Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and others. Historically, the country was about evenly balanced between Catholic and Protestant, in a complex patchwork. During the Reformation, Switzerland became home to many reformers. Geneva converted to Protestantism in 1536, just before John Calvin arrived. In 1541, he founded the Republic of Geneva on his own ideals. It became known internationally as the Protestant Rome and housed such reformers as Theodore Beza, William Farel, or Pierre Viret. Zurich became another reform stronghold around the same time, with Huldrych Zwingli and Heinrich Bullinger taking the lead. Anabaptists Felix Manz and Conrad Grebel also operated there. They were later joined by the fleeing Peter Martyr Vermigli and Honstank. Other centers included Basel, Bern, and St. Gallen. One canton, Appenzell, was officially divided into Catholic and Protestant sections in 1597. The larger cities and their cantons used to be predominantly Protestant. Central Switzerland, the Valais, the Ticino, Appenzell Inner Roads, the Jura, and Fribourg are traditionally Catholic. The Swiss Constitution of 1848, under the recent impression of the clashes of Catholic vs Protestant cantons that culminated in the Sonderbundskrieg, consciously defines a consociational state, allowing the peaceful coexistence of Catholics and Protestants. A 1980 initiative calling for the complete separation of church and state was rejected by 79% of the voters. Some traditionally Protestant cantons and cities nowadays have a slight Catholic majority, because since about 1970 a steadily growing minority were not affiliated with any religious body, especially in traditionally Protestant regions, such as Basel City, Canton of Neuchâtel, Canton of Geneva, Canton of Vaud, or Zurich City. Cuisine. The cuisine is multifaceted. While dishes such as fondue, raclette, or rosti are omnipresent, each region developed its gastronomy according to the varieties of climate and language. For example, Zürcher Geschnitzels, English sliced meat Zurich style. Traditional Swiss cuisine uses ingredients similar to those in other European countries, as well as unique dairy products and cheeses such as Gruyere or Emmental, produced in the valleys of Gruyères and Emmental. The number of fine dining establishments is high, particularly in western Switzerland. Chocolate has been made in Switzerland since the 18th century. Its reputation grew at the end of the 19th century with the invention of modern techniques such as concealing and tempering, which enabled higher quality. Another breakthrough was the invention of solid milk chocolate in 1875 by Daniel Peter. The Swiss are the world's largest chocolate consumers. The most popular alcoholic drink is wine. Switzerland is notable for its variety of grape varieties, reflecting the large variations in terroirs. Swiss wine is produced mainly in Valais, Vaud, Geneva, and Ticino, with a small majority of white wines. Vineyards have been cultivated in Switzerland since the Roman era, even though traces of a more ancient origin can be found. The most widespread varieties are the Chasselas and Pinot Noir. Merlot is the main variety produced in Ticino.